was my first night, driving my taxi around town, looking for passengers. It was late and there was not a lot of people on the streets. I was about to call it a day and head home, when a man in a dark-colored, oversized coat with the collars up hailed my taxi. His hat pulled low, over his eyes, as if he had a phobia of people looking at his face. He climbed to the back seat of my cab as I pulled off and started driving down the street. For a few long minutes, the air in my cab reeked of silence. I stared at him in my ride-view mirror, his silhouette against the back window, and his eyes nowhere to be seen. Just a black shadow figure. He did not give me a destination to head to, so I had to ask. "Mister?" I broke the silence. "Where would you like to go?" There was a moment of dead air yet again, before he answered, in a very deep voice. "To the North Cemetery." I drove him there in hush. I thought maybe switch on the radio and listen to some music. The silence is nearly killing me. So I searched through the radio channels, and besides death metal, which I'm not a fan of, there were nothing on. There we were, North Cemetery. The road was narrow. Tombstones and crosses flanked either sides, and trees with leafless branches hung overhead, the moon up high in the sky. It was a perfect scene for a horror movie. Why would anyone want to come to the cemetery at these wee hours, early in the morning, late at night? I thought to myself. My passenger alighted and told me to wait, or else I'll be sorry, he said. There was something about his voice and physique that really spooked me. I didn't feel very comfortable with his request, but I wanted the fare, so I waited unwillingly. After a while, he came back, and strange as it may sound, he seemed to be wiping something off of his hands. He opened the door and slouched down back seat of my cab. South Cemetery. The only 2 words he said. Although in doubt, I drove him there. Once we got there, the same thing happened again. A perfect scene for a horror movie. Him asking me to wait, or else I'll be sorry. This time I was feeling much more uncomfortable and uneasy, but still, I waited. It puzzled me what he could be doing in the cemeteries. Just exactly what business could he have? Again, he returned to the car, brushing off something from his hands and coat. As he got to the back seat, I peeked at my rearview mirror, and he could be seen wiping his mouth. "East Cemetery," he murmured. Yes, I was very frightened, but I was determined to get my fare. So I drove him there. Once we reached, it all happened again. This time, my curiosity got the better of me. I need to know what was going on. Despite my fears, I followed him into the dark cemetery. Like a cat on its guard, I tiptoed behind him, gently landing my every steps. I watched him as he walked silently. It seems like there was a particular person he was looking for. He finally stopped in his tracks. In front of him was a fresh grave. Falling to his knees, he used his bare hands to scrape and dig at the earth until he reached the coffin underneath. I was barely breathing, partly afraid that he would notice me, and partly because I was shocked and terrified. I wanted to flee, but I couldn't. My legs felt like dead weight, rotting me to the spot. He opened the coffin lid, revealing the corpse that lies in it. I covered shut my mouth, trying to prevent my screams of horror. With the lid removed, he suddenly rose from his knees. Perhaps he heard my breathing. Perhaps my screams escaped my palms that were supposed to keep it in. Or perhaps he heard a twig snap under my shoes. He stared at me, with his crimson red eyes that seemed to be luminous. I was doomed. At this point of time, I knew he wasn't mundane. Making his way straight towards me, it looked as if he was running, but he wasn't. It was like he's gliding fast and silent over the grass. In seconds, he was upon me, grasping my shirt and pulling my face close to his. He was very strong, lifting me a few feet above the ground with only an arm. As he opens his mouth, a pair of threatening fangs revealed themselves, blood dripping from his mouth. I was almost knocked out by his horrendous, decaying breath. There I was, facing my death. Curiosity indeed kills the cat. Maybe if I wasn't so determined in getting my fare, I wouldn't have a fist around my throat. Maybe if I didn't drive through that street and be hailed by him, I wouldn't have met his fangs. But it was too late for maybes and ifs as the vampire sunk his teeth into my fleshy neck. This scary story is often told of a taxi driver who was working the night shift. As he drove through the quiet city roads, the dashboard clock slowly counted down to midnight. Suddenly, he saw a beautiful young woman standing at the corner of a traffic light junction. She had long black hair and was dressed in a flowing white dress. He stopped his cab to ask if she needed a ride. The young lady turned slowly to stare at him. Then she got into the cab without a word. As soon as she entered the car, the taxi driver was hit with a strong scent of jasmine flowers. When he asked where she wanted to go, the girl simply handed him a piece of paper. On it was written a number and the name of a road. The taxi driver was not familiar with the location and asked the girl if she could help direct him. She nodded silently. However, the young lady did not say a single word throughout the ride, only nodding her head to indicate when the taxi driver had taken the correct course. At last, they found the road, which was situated well away from the city center. It was narrow, just enough for one car to pass, and dark, as there were no working streetlights. It was now almost midnight and a light mist had formed, making it difficult to see along the road. As the taxi driver inched forward carefully, he tried to make out the addresses on the houses on his left and right. To his growing horror, there were no houses in sight, just endless rows of gravestones. He broke out in a cold sweat, and the back of his neck prickled. Not daring to look into his rearview mirror now, he nervously asked the young lady if this was really where she wanted to go. There was no answer from the back seat. As he slowly guided his cab through the darkness, he desperately hoped that there was a house somewhere ahead where the girl lived. At last, he felt a light tap on his shoulder. He dared not turn around but simply stopped the car. He heard the rustle of money and felt the girl hand him the cash. He took the money in his shaking hand and stuck it in the ashtray compartment without counting it. He heard the rear door open and close. Then he sped off down the dark, winding road and headed straight home without a glance behind. The next morning, curiosity got the better of him, and he returned to the place where he had dropped the young lady. It was indeed a vast cemetery, sliced through by the narrow road he had driven along the night before. He found the lot number that the girl had given him. Chills seeped into his bones when he saw the woman's picture staring back at him from a fresh gravestone. As he got back into the cab, he remembered the money in the ashtray. To his horror, it was all Chinese hell notes. He threw it out of the cab and sped away. Later, he found out that a girl had died the week before in a horrible accident at the very junction he had picked her up from. It was a hit and run, and it happened at around midnight. The driver was never caught. This is a real story spread among Singapore taxi drivers. It was about 7:30 p.m. in Chinese New Year's Eve. Taxi driver Ah Tan, a 60-year-old man, lived in Bedok Reservoir Road, was rushing back home to celebrate the family dinner. He happened to pass by a remote path. That used to be a farm village but has been deserted for a few years. There were altogether 4 bus stops along the roadside. While he was driving along the path, he saw a young lady at the bus stop flagging for his taxi. At first, he wanted to take the lady, but he was going to be late for his dinner. Being a person particular for punctuality, he decided not to take this customer. Then, he carried on driving. To his surprise, there was another lady flagging him down. This time he felt familiar because she was wearing a red t-shirt and black skirt, but due to fading light, he could not see her face. When he passed by the 3rd bus stop, he felt a bit of horror as another lady was flagging him again in the same red and black clothes. How would a lady moves faster than the wheels? The distance between 2 stops is about 0.8 km away. This time he really felt horrible and stepped the accelerator harder. When passing the 4th one, a lady charged at his car. He was driving at least at the speed of 80 km per hour. The lady flew over his vehicle and dropped inside a drain next to the bus stop. Ah Tan cried out due to extremely horror. The victim, once again in red and black clothes. Ah Tan felt so bad and had no mood celebrating New Year. Finally, he decided to report to the police. The body in red and black skirt was found. It was a young Chinese lady aged between 20 to 25-year-old. Ah Tan's horror got attested. The lady's cause of death is not by car accident, but stabbed by sharp object. She had been dead for about 3 days. The body already started to decay. After the police statement, Ah Tan thought of the whole things had been over. Of course, the police snickered at his initial statement and made him do another credible one. 1 week later, Ah Tan's horrible feeling had lessened. What a coincidence! He striked first prize 4D for his taxi number plate. He won a big sum of money. He was so delighted in this. But unfortunately, he fell down in the bathroom and fractured his right arm. He was admitted to Changi Hospital. In the hospital, he started to have nightmare night after night. A young lady in red and black skirt kept calling him Ah Pei, "Uncle, when are you coming down?" He really cannot tolerate to it anymore. Moreover, the inflammation started on his wound. Luckily, one of his friend, who is a Taoist priest, suggested to give up his stakes money instead of plead for safety. He told Ah Tan that the lady ghost is gnawed by serious grievances and has become a ferocious spirit. Since she could not avenge the murderer due to some reasons, Ah Tan chosen to be the scapegoat for her rebirth. The 4D winning stake is to exchange for his life. After a battle of mind, the lady still disturbed him in the meanwhile. With a shattered nerves, he decided to give up his $100,000 to the charity community chest. Strange enough, he recovered from the illness rapidly. Everything seemed to be over, but a short period after his discharge, his wife striked 4D again. The stake amount is also $100,000. This is because one day his wife went market and bought some vegetable. She saw the wrapper was the used newspaper which reported the young lady's murder case. Strangely, there was 4 numbers on it, and his wife bet on and striked. After a fierce argument between them, Ah Tan failed to convince his wife to donate the money. A deep worry began to burden Ah Tan when his wife started puzzlehead and liked to put on red t-shirt and black skirt. She seemed to go mad, and the temper got hotter and hotter. One morning, she suddenly told Ah Tan that the life is meaningless. This time Ah Tan was decisive. He gave up all the money immediately. He brought his wife to the temple and asked the monks to release the young lady's souls from purgatory. After this incident, he stopped buying 4D or involves in all kinds of gambling. Not long ago, he'd also gave up his taxi license. Lucknow, India, 6th December 2017, 5 p.m., a cold evening. I had to attend a dinner party around 60 kilometers away from the hotel I was staying in. I called a cab company and booked a pickup at 7 p.m. About 20 minutes later, I got a text message on my mobile phone with the name of the driver, Abdul Qadir, and the car registration number. I took a shower and got dressed up. Exactly at 7 p.m., I got a call from the driver. Punctual, I thought. I went downstairs and greeted Abdul Qadir, a man in his late 50s. He was wearing a traditional Indian dress. He was sporting gray beard. Abdul told me that the drive would take a little longer than usual, maybe around an hour and a half because of the foggy weather. That didn't bother me because I had to reach the party by 9 p.m. I checked Abdul's ID and the car number and jumped into the front seat. 10 minutes into the journey, I noticed that Abdul hadn't switched on the meter. "Abdul, you haven't switched on the meter yet. How are you going to charge me?" I asked. "Never mind, sir. This trip is free for you," Abdul responded with a smile. "What?" I said with a puzzled look. "Sir, today is my last day at the job. I am retiring tomorrow and will go on pilgrimage after that. This is my last assignment and you are my last passenger. I can't take money from you," Abdul clarified. "No, Abdul, I can't accept that. You give me service and I pay for that. We have met only 10 minutes back. I can't take any favors from you for no reason," I shot back. "Sir, I always thought that I would do my last assignment for free. 200 rupees won't really make any difference to the either of us, will it? Please allow this poor Indian man to feel good on his last day at work," Abdul said. I couldn't argue any further. I just smiled. and thought that simple good things still haven't vanished from this world entirely, and sometimes it is these poor people who remind us of these good things. I started chatting with Abdul. He had been driving for 35 years. "Never once have I missed a pickup, sir. Never once have I not been on time," Abdul claimed proudly. I couldn't disbelieve him. He had already won over my heart. But then I noticed his watch. An old, worn-out watch which was not working and still showing 6:45 p.m. I found it oddly funny that a man who was wearing a dead watch was claiming to be so punctual. "Your watch is dead, Abdul," I said a bit sarcastically. "Oh, my father gave this watch to me. It doesn't work, but it's my lucky charm. So I wear it all the time." "But I don't need a watch to be on time," Abdul said with a smile. We both laughed, and indeed Abdul was on time, at least in my case, despite the dead watch. We continued talking about various other things, his family, my family, about the city, and many more. 90 minutes spent with a good man, and we reached my destination sharp at 8:30 p.m. I got down from the car and said to Abdul, "You're a good man, Abdul. I know, you wouldn't take money from me, but just as a memory of this drive, I insist you take this watch of mine. Don't say no." I took my watch off and gave it to Abdul. Abdul resisted initially, but accepted my little gift eventually. I thanked Abdul, and we said our goodbyes to each other. Abdul left, and I walked into the dinner party. About 10 minutes later, my phone rang. I picked it up. "Am I speaking with Mr. Utsav?" "Yes, tell me." "Sir, I am calling on behalf of the cab company." "Sir, we are so sorry that your pickup hasn't arrived yet. We will arrange for another cab immediately." A lady's voice said from the other side. "What do you mean?" "I was picked up by your driver sharp on time, and in fact, I have reached my destination now," I replied. "Who picked you up, sir?" the lady asked after a pause. "Abdul Qadir, the driver who was supposed to pick me up. I had checked his ID and the car registration number before boarding," I said. "Sir, you must have been confused. Somebody else may have picked you up. Abdul Qadir died in a road accident at around 6:45 p.m. today, 15 minutes before your pickup time. He was on his way to pick you up when he met with the accident. We have been informed about his death just now," the lady said. I froze. I understood why Abdul didn't take money from me. It was simply because he didn't need any. Why was his watch dead? Because his time stopped at 6:45. Yet he did his duty one last time. And he was on time as he had claimed, even on his last assignment. I started sweating even in the December cold. I looked at my wrist. My watch was still there. Abdul didn't need my watch either. A few years ago, I worked as a taxi driver in Helsinki, Finland, during the night shifts. These hours paid better, had less competition, and I was used to working at night from my previous job as a freelance digital artist. Before I begin, I should mention that I am a transgender woman, though this story happened before I started transitioning from man to woman. Helsinki is small compared to other capital cities. After about 20 minutes of driving in any direction, except south towards the sea, you end up in areas with forests, fields, and small towns. I usually avoided the city center to steer clear of extremely drunk people and drug users. I had a few regulars who wanted to go to the same bar every night, and I was somewhat well known in the area as that nice trans guy. I offered discounts early in the night and got good tips when the bars closed around 4 and 5 a.m. One night around 3:30 a.m., a man got into my car at a taxi stop. He asked if we could first go to his apartment and then to an address almost an hour north. He offered to pay extra for the long drive back, explaining that he used to be a taxi driver too and knew it wouldn't be profitable for me otherwise. I agreed, and we set off. He asked a lot of questions before we reached his apartment, about my night, where I lived, if I had a boyfriend or girlfriend, and for my phone number. These were typical questions, and I usually answered them. Giving out my phone number was common because it helped taxi drivers get regulars who called them directly, leading to more work and less waiting in line. When we arrived at his apartment, He asked me to wait a few minutes and went inside. After about 10 minutes, he returned, and we began the hour-long drive to his final destination. Initially, he sat next to me, but when he got back in after visiting his apartment, he sat directly behind me, which made me uneasy. He stopped talking, and when I asked for a more detailed address, he said he would explain once we got closer. After half an hour, we turned from the main road onto smaller roads and finally onto a dirt road. I asked how far we had to go because I didn't want to dirty my car before my morning airport jobs. He said we would arrive soon. 5 minutes later, he started talking again, and we chatted for a bit. Suddenly, he asked personal questions about my life and appearance. I told him I was a man, though I looked a bit feminine. He replied, "It does not matter," and went quiet. Then, he resumed asking inappropriate questions about my clothing, makeup, and if I wanted to meet his friend and party with them. I raised my voice and told him to stop, saying I wasn't interested. He asked me to stop the car, and another man got in and sat next to me, saying only, "Hi." We were in the middle of a forest on a dirt road, with only the car headlights illuminating the surroundings. I asked again how far we had to go, but they didn't answer. The man behind me leaned forward and started speaking quietly to the other man in a language that sounded similar to Russian. I told them both to get out, but they just laughed, and the man behind me hit me lightly on the head. I tried to press the help button that all Finnish taxis have, which starts recording and alerts other drivers that a taxi needs help. However, I struggled to find it because I wasn't driving my usual taxi. Before I could press it, the man next to me hit me, and the one behind me pulled my hair. I managed to open the door and fell out, kicking the man next to me in the head. They dragged me to the front of the car, and one of them held me down while taking out a stick. I yelled that I had pressed the help button and that the camera had taken their picture, and the police knew my location, even though I hadn't actually managed to press the button. They paused, and I kicked the second man as hard as I could in the stomach. He fell, holding his stomach, and the other man kicked the stick to my forehead. At that moment, my phone rang, and the man I had kicked ran into the forest, cursing in Finnish. The man with the stick stared at me, and my phone rang again. He eventually got up and ran into the forest too. I answered the phone, and it was one of my regular customers asking if I was close by and if he could get a ride home. I started crying and thanked him, asking if he could talk to me during the drive back. He talked to me for almost the whole hour-long drive back. That phone call saved me. In the last few weeks before quitting my job, I drove that customer for free almost every night to the bar and back home.